because I need this on my computer. All right, it is started officially. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, I am presenting one. I'm going to start my clock now. All right, so I read chapter 2. How do I set up my classroom for deep conceptual learning? What resonated with me, I went to page 37 and I pulled out the 4 guiding principles. We honor developmental stages of childhood with intellectual rigor. 2, conceptual learning happens best in a student-centered, thinking-centered classroom. 3, it is important to teach students explicitly about how to learn conceptually. 4, conceptual learning is iterative. Students need chances to refine and increase the sophistication of thinking. The reason why I picked those 4, because overall in this chapter, it goes in depth about how each one is important. Like you can't have one without the other. You got to understand how to honor a child's developmental stage, knowing on figure, I think it was figure 2.3, gives you guidelines of what to look for when a student is doing certain things in the environment. Like if they're exploring materials, this is how you should approach it. Or if they have not encountered the material, this is how you should approach it. So that's giving you an example of what it would look like to honor the child. And then when it said student-centered environment, when I see these things like in the environment, you have reflection wall, the question box, the science material, social studies materials, art materials, math materials, language material. It's so many things that you can put into the environment to go along with the conceptual based learning. I thought that was pretty cool. And some of these things we already do. And I also like the explicit teaching. You can't just automatically say kids already know what conceptual based learning is. You have to explicitly teach that. What does it look like? What is the norm? What how they are to engage it, giving them language to engage conceptual based learning. And the last one, giving them sophistication of thinking. And that even goes back into explicit teaching, because most kids, what does that mean? What is sophistication of their thinking? What does that look like? It goes in depth in these examples of exactly what it looks like. And I thought it was pretty cool how they broke it down to how it looks for the teacher. Oh, that time goes fast. I felt rushed. All right, let's go to the next screen. All right, can I go to the next one? There we go. Uh-oh. Is that presenter 2? I'm sorry. No, that's still me.
It's still presenter 1.
Oh, it's still me?
Uh-huh.
So now you're good. No, go back to where you was at. It just started the timer again.
Oh, okay, there we go. All right. All right, ready, go.
I like that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you got it.
No, I was just saying that I like that it says in the chapter to explicitly teach the concept-based instruction, because I guess that's something that we kind of probably don't think about, but actually like modeling what it looks like for kids, putting things around the room. I like that it's talking about how to change the actual environment of your classroom to kind of encourage that concept-based instruction as well. And so I just thought that was pretty interesting, because I didn't even think about that. Like, oh yeah, you got to show the kids how to do it before they can actually do it.
Yeah, I agree. When you were talking about the student-centered environment, I always try to create my classroom to make it a very culturally inclusive and welcoming environment. So, like their safe place, but I never really think about how to make it a student-centered environment. So when you gave that example of a reflection wall and a question box, that's actually something I might try to do, have a wall of just concepts we've already talked about. Because I have a word wall and the sight word wall and all those things, but a reflection wall is extremely specific to the concepts you address. So I really like that.
I like hearing that you mentioned about the different subject area walls, not walls, but materials. Sometimes things are in a closet. So I like that it's social studies, art, math. And I think when kids see all of the different subject areas, it feels like their room, and they even get to start to know the different subjects as well. And also like what Taylor said about explicitly teaching, because this whole concept based, I didn't know if it was supposed to naturally occur or what. So that was refreshing to hear.
Yeah, and it's good to include that so that they know, because sometimes we assume that they know, like you said, we think they know it, but they don't. So.
Presenter one.
I think it starts
Did it
over.
switch? Yeah, why does it do that?
Yeah, that's just how the power slides are. If you
Okay.
hit the slide, it's gonna redo the timer. So yeah.
Mhm.
All right, sorry, y'all. Thought this was going so smoothly, but we'll get it. All right, presenter two.
All right, so I also did chapter 2, but I did it in the secondary standpoint. So the part that stood out to me, it was discussing one of the teaching students to learn conceptually. So the paragraph that I like, it says students also need time to think about the definition of a concept and how concepts are different from facts. They need time to practice, evaluate, and writing their own statements of conceptual relationships. After a few attempts, though, we've seen students shift not only their approach to learning, but their drive. When learning isn't just about retelling what they heard from someone else, but using their personal intellect to create their own understanding and unravel complex situations, it brings the joy back to learning for the students. It is an investment of a few class periods, but it will pay off. So that really stood with me because I am a high school math teacher. And when students get to me, math is their number one hated subject. So I teach them the things and also get them to think about things. And one thing that I do a lot of is discovery. I like for them to discover how to solve a problem or how to go through the procedures, because I believe they understand it better and they grasp the concept better, and it lets them have that aha moment, like, oh my God, oh, I get this, it's not as hard as I think. So having them to have that drive of actually working out the problems and really understanding what they're doing, that makes it even more give them a deeper understanding than just giving them something and just say, okay, here's this how you do it, here's the work, but actually having them to learn and practice. And I think it's a little difference in our book, but one of the things they talked about was in here they talked a lot about different strategies we can use inside the classroom. And one thing that I liked, and it kind of was a discussion that we had in the orientation about the growth mindset, letting the students see, okay, are you born with intellect? And having them think about that, and then showing them, okay, well, can you grow into intellect? Can you learn it and do it and get it that way? And I like that it introduces both sides to the students so that they can realize, okay, you don't have to be born. I can grow into it and learn how to be intellectually smart versus, oh, because when we grow up, we know, oh, he's just born with it, he's smart. But knowing that there are some people who actually work towards it. So that was one strategy that they brought up that could be a good introduction piece into gifted classes.
All right, I'm gonna go to the next slide. All right. I don't know why it doesn't go to the next slide when I do it.
See, can you do page down? Or
Okay, because every time I click it, it just doesn't, it just starts the timer over.
When
there
you
we
start,
go.
when you want to start the timer, just go to the next slide. Because if you click the timer, it's gonna still make you play the timer again. You know what I'm saying? When you click to the next slide. So when you click the next slide, it'll play whatever animations you have on each slide. So you don't have to click on the actual timer picture.
Okay. All right, you guys ready to respond?
Mhm.
Right.
So
Um,
I really, oh, sorry.
no,
Oh, I
ahead.
was
I'll go
just gonna, I like what Ms. Trinae said about teaching concepts versus facts, because I do think like if it's a way of life in elementary school and then you get to high school, I think having that differentiated for high school students is they'll get that. I also love the whole strategy of, are you born with intellect versus can you grow into it? And I think that's very important for our high school learners to know. That concept learning will help them grow intellectually. It's not something that somebody else is going to naturally have. So I enjoy hearing that you said that that was an actual strategy.
Just to piggyback on you, Miss Chelsea, what you were saying, that ties back into that explicit piece, explicitly teaching that. And that is very important because they need to know exactly what it is and how is that accomplished and what does that look like. I also resonated with time to process. I do know as a second grade teacher, I tend to move a lot fast because I know there's so much we got to hit at. And I don't allow, sometimes I rush that and I don't allow the process to happen. So knowing that in concept based, it's important. They need that time to process and they need to go through the steps to see what that looks like. So I like that.
Yeah, I agree. That time to think about the concept and allow them to attempt so you can see that shift in their learning. That's really how you can observe and see if what you're saying is really connecting. If you give them that time to think, even when you do like number talks and stuff like that, though kids will always shoot up and raise their hand, but they didn't give themselves that time to just, okay, let me look at this process and think. So I think that is really essential with any concept.
Presenter 3. Are
That's
you
me, right?
ready? Yep.
Yep. All right, so I had chapter 3, what are the building blocks of concept-based instruction? And it was very similar. I'm gonna just read the part. So right here it says, students come to the classroom with preconceptions about how the world works. If their initial understanding is not engaged, they may fail to grasp the new concepts and information, or they may learn from the purposes of a test, but revert to their preconceptions outside of the classroom. And that's something I see a lot. I teach first grade. So a lot of the times my kids memorize instead of actually fully grasping that concept. So this chapter is basically a whole bunch of ideas and different strategies you can use to address that prior knowledge and those real world connections to your concepts. So I just jotted down some things. One of the things was 4 corners. That's something I've done up into high school. We play college, you play 4 corners just to see, so you can gauge the room and see where people fall. One of the things I haven't heard of was Marzano's 6-step vocabulary model. So basically steps 1 through 3 introduce the concept with explain, restate, and show. And then steps 3 through 6 talk about discussing, refining, and applying. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then I never heard of the SEEI presentations. And that stands for state, elaborate, exemplify, and illustrate. What really stood out to me was there's this part in the book, because again, I'm in first grade, so my kids, they come to me and they can't even really write sentences yet. So illustrations are really key for my teaching. But it said that illustrations are the best indications of understanding or misunderstandings. So what I like to do, and this connected to me in the classroom, is whenever I have a new topic or something new I'm talking about my kids, I ask them, well, does anybody know, like today, we started addition. I asked them, does anybody know what addition is? What does that mean? Have you heard it before? And I got to hear different things. I heard kids say, oh, it's counting. Oh, we get big numbers. Somebody said subtraction. So it's like they've heard it, they're making those connections, but I can use what they already know and I can build off of that. Like, yes, it is, counting is involved, and subtraction is like addition, but it's not the same. So I thought that was pretty cool. I never made that full understanding myself, that illustrations do show you what a kid does know and doesn't know. I also liked here, they talked about with the SEEI model, they even said give kids a group, give them a concept, and then have them create their own definition and illustrations and explain it. Because then you can see if they truly understand it. If a kid can restate a definition in their own words, even if they use a lesser vocabulary, you can see that they're understanding that concept. or maybe the new example illustrations they draw, it can show you, okay, I see where he's confused at because of the way he drew this picture. So I thought that was pretty cool, using the illustrations to see what does a kid really know, because they might not always be able to vocally or write down what they don't understand. Oh, cut me right off.
I hit the button that time, but it still did it. There we go. All right, so you guys ready to respond?
As a second grade teacher, drawing is enlightening, particularly in the subject of math. When I say draw what's happening, and I think you said something, Penny, about it's the key to understanding and misunderstanding. And I just totally agree with that. So big on illustrations, even in older kids, and you try to figure out, well, what's happening. Because a lot of times, like you said, especially someone who's can't read or can't read well, you can figure out what they know through a drawing. So I like that, resonated with me.
I like the Marzano 6-step that you talked about, the refine and reflect, because I was like, a lot of times we don't give time to reflect on things. So like later on, kids actually like going back and seeing their work from like the beginning of the year, and then them like changing it or seeing how their thoughts about it have evolved. Now, I don't know where we will find the time for that, but I was like, that's a cool kind of concept to think about, because I was like, even like with the kids writing and stuff, like allowing them to like go back and just look at their old writing and like reflecting on it, like, wow, like let me rewrite this and change now that I know all this learning, like let me go back and say, change all the, reflect on it. That I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So in mine, my SEI was more, not illustration, because the kids kind of understand a little more, but it's actually what I tell my kids all the time. If you can explain it or teach it, then you know it. So basically for my SES presentation, is basically the kids getting together and putting a poster together and explaining it and teaching it to their peers. So, and then when you say illustrate, meeting them where they are.
All right, presenter 4, are you ready?
I'm ready. So I had the second part of chapter 3. And so it started with uncover and transfer. So the text says on page 75, the bottom part, the preceding strategies are important first steps in journey for conceptual understanding. When dealing with familiar concepts, we must first gauge students' pre-instructional understanding. And that just kind of had me thinking like, okay, we must first gauge students' pre-instructional understanding. So I was like, okay, we already kind of do a lot of that with like KWL charts, even like with pretest and things like that. But then how that it kind of changed my perception is, okay, deliberate in how we actually introduce those new concepts. And then it says the crux of conceptual learning is developing deep understanding about conceptual relationships. So then further, that knowledge for students and thinking about, okay, well, how can they build these conceptual relationships with it, right? So uncover and then transfer. So see what they know and then transfer it into how they can actually go further and build those relationships. So that's like having kids unlock new situations. Now for me, sometimes it's hard for me. I'm a 4th grade teacher. So sometimes I like find myself like giving the answers or talking like, okay, it's taking them too long to figure it out themselves. Like, let me go ahead and just give it to them. So that's me a lot of the times. But I was like, okay, don't tell students, in the text it was talking about, don't tell students the connections, help them, have them find their own new context. In order for them to maximize their learning. And then it also talks about how context provides a foundation for understanding more abstract conceptual relationships as well. And I also like in this chapter how it talks about making thinking visible. So just like you guys said, I'm a visual learner myself. So especially like them just mapping out their ideas and understanding. One of the the antonyms they used were like generate, sort, connect, elaborate. So just engaging that prior knowledge and understanding, determine the extent of that knowledge, and then having the students be able to like learn how to make their own connections and be able to take what they've learned and what they already know and put it into their life right now or like outside of the classroom. Just making those connections I thought was pretty interesting. And then it talks about the conceptual inquiry cycle, which is taking that abstract, it's the connection between like their abstract conceptual questions and then putting it into specific context, and come to find out it's all like connected.
All right, let's get ready to respond. I have to say that I like the fact that we're making the self-talk, making it evident, like present, it's almost like self-talk, but it goes a little bit more because it helps them to see the relationships between the two. And then I like how you stated that, and I often have this issue that I'm often telling the answer because that process again, that I have to allow the process to happen, but it is quite difficult to do that. But I know we got to do it, but I see how if I make my thinking, explicit and I'm putting it out there so they can actually see it to make those connections, and they will be able to have those relationships across academics, like not just with just writing, but it could be with social studies or with science or with math. I can see how that strategy could tie in perfectly for that.
I like what you said about, and I probably missed the third one or have it out of order. You said something about generate, sort, connect, elaborate. Was that correct? Okay. Yeah, I like that. Just kind of sounds like the beginning is where I'm thinking about teaching writing. I did a writing lesson, oh my God, this week. And it was like, let's generate a bunch of ideas. Then the whole sorting is like, okay, let's now put some organization to everything. Then the whole connection and then elaboration. And so when you said that, that's what that resonated with me. And I thought about my writing lesson with young kids.
I agree with what you guys were just saying.
I was trying to intervene, but I didn't move fast enough to unmute.
Say, by the time my thought came, I was like, oh, we got 5 seconds. Let me just agree. Because I do agree. So.
All right, presenter 5, are you ready?
Okay, hold on. Let me get okay. Woo, it's a lot, but okay.
All right.
I am ready. Okay, so I had chapter 4. I'm gonna try to be as brief as possible, but chapter 4, I like this chapter because it gave you things you can do in your lessons. So I'm gonna read a quick excerpt. Basically, this chapter provided 5 instructional frameworks to help guide you as you experiment with lesson planning for deep conceptual learning. This is not an exhaustive list of how you can foster students' ability to uncover conceptual relationships and transfer their understanding. And that was on page 114, the actual conclusion. So they gave you 5 tools to help you with lesson planning. And I'm just going to try to go quickly through all of them. But they all follow the same format. The format is there's a conceptual question. Remember back from chapter 1. Then there's some specific context that lead to deep thinking. Then the students have to explain what they've learned. And then the final one is, can you transfer all of this conceptual learning to a whole new situation? And so if you just keep those 4 things in mind, we got it. So here's our first lesson framework. One that you could do is the inquiry process. And that kind of speaks for itself. You start with a hook, ask questions, investigate and organize, and then again, transfer the learning. The second framework, generating and testing a hypothesis. Kind of think about like a science fair, the traditional science project. This framework has 7 steps, and I found it to be very student-centered. The students write a response to a question. And then again, it follows that same format where they go deeper, they develop a hypothesis, and then again, towards the end, they have to transfer understanding to a new situation. Number 3 was the workshop model. And that some of you may have heard something called flipped classrooms, where the students actually watch videos and a virtual presentation. The teacher teaches, but only briefly, and then the children do the rest of the work. Lesson framework 4 is project-based learning. If you've ever worked in a STEM school, you may be familiar with that. Everything starts with a project, and it's extended learning for a period of time, not just a week. So this would be like a 4-week project. The 5th one, final one, 14 seconds, is personalized learning. That is not learning on your own pace or virtually. This is where you have to do habits of mind. What kind of learner are you? And once the teacher does that, then the students can learn that way.
All right, get ready to respond. All right, I can go. I must say the last one, personal learning, I like that. I think a lot of our kids, I mean, we teach social emotional a lot, but this is like a whole nother level of social emotional. It's explicit. It's giving a name to how I think. And I'm thinking in return, if I understand how I think or how I learn, I become a amazing learner. I mean, there's nothing I can't learn if I know exactly how to, how my brain processes. I think I like that. I think I'm going to use that.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially in these early years, I feel like that's really important to explicitly state, like, all right, these are the type of ways you can learn. Which one do you most identify with? Like, I think that's something we should definitely all have to do, for sure. That's really cool.
I'm not gonna lie, I know personalized learning is one of our APS 5, right? But I never fully understood how different it is from like signature programming and things like that. So when she explained it's the habits of mind and what type of learner you are, that made it just kind of click for me. Like, oh, okay, it's how can I adapt my lesson to how this student learns so they can get this concept. So that really made it all just make sense to me. I'm not gonna lie, that worked. I like that wording.
So at Purpose Built, we're actually centered around project-based learning, but don't know how it really is supposed to go. And from what I did research before I got hired, I thought it was one way, but it's just, I think it's a way to do it, but it's just, I don't know. It's just how it can be done. I think it can be beneficial for the kids.
And now we just got a debrief, right?
All right, so yeah, we have discussed, so share important or interesting. So you can finish your idea when we start the clock, Ms. Brooks. Okay, all right. So we're gonna go ahead and go into, I'm just gonna say, like, overall, when listening to each one's piece that we just presented, it definitely ties back into those principles that I touched on when we first started, about how being explicit, about the environment, about making sure that we are student-centered. And I think it was student-centered, my bad. What else? It was something else I wanted to make sure I hit on. Let me get back to my page. And making sure that we honor the developmental stages. It seems like each one of these strategies it could be tailored to exactly how that learner learns. So you're not just looking at the brain, but you're looking at the implementation, the material, and a strategy. I like that. It's like overall, it just ties this big picture together.
Yeah, I agree. I think all these chapters you guys been tongue tied. All the chapters and everything I've been hearing, it kind of just sounds like conceptual, having that conceptual learning and that conceptual understanding is our job to be more intentional when we teach. That's what I'm hearing a lot of. What it all comes down to is putting more thought into my planning and putting more emphasis on the things that really matter in each standard. So to me, it sounds like I really need to take a second, look over my lesson plans and my PowerPoints and make sure, am I really addressing the concept, or am I giving out these facts and having them memorized? So that's what all of this is sounding like to me.
And don't forget to the transfer. I don't know if I'm making up a word, transferation, but transferring that to another situation and seeing them take that they learn from the conceptual. That's how you'll know they got it. Because if you can only add in math, but then we get somewhere, maybe it's an art class or music class, and there's a problem, and if you can't figure that out, and it involves adding, all you can do is add in. And I'm sure that's what happens in high school. A lot of kids only can do things in that one class, but then you go to the real world or you get a job or whatever, and it's like that whole transference is missing. So
I think to connect that back to what I was trying to say about project-based learning, that's part of that transformation. But the part that I struggle with in the beginning of project-based learning and that I'm still trying to wrap my mind around is actually, how do you teach without teaching? Because with the project-based learning, they're actually taking some concept or some situation or problem, and they're actually going through the standards through that problem and actually learning it on their own and basically kind of teach themselves. Because when I was like, well, am I supposed to teach them the concepts and then get them the project and go through it? But technically they supposed to start with the project or the basis and then go through it that way. But I do like what Penny said about being more intentional about what you're teaching them and what they're learning. And I think it's cool that even though we're at two different levels, just to see how they want them to think in the beginning level and then how they want them to think at the ending. So I do like, and I'm glad we decided to stay together so that we all can see how they need to think or build up as a young elementary student to a high school student.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just like to see all of this in action too, because I'm just like, especially like, because the way that we're supposed to have it, like we're integrating our gifted program into the classroom. But like with everyone, I was like, the time, that's the only thing that I was thinking about through this. I was like, this takes a lot of time. And like, I'm like, for those kids that just never will even get there with this type of teaching, I was like, I would like to see like how people that are already doing all of this, how they kind of do this.
I can say it. I teach gifted, and I have definitely used some of these strategies, but it does take time. It takes a lot of intentional planning. So I think we're going to debrief. Okay. So yes, it's 8 minutes. So we've kind of been saying the same thing, but I want to see if we can expand a little bit more based on like how would we see this in our classrooms with this? Because I really am intrigued to hear how each one of you guys' minds are when it comes to this and putting it into play. Yeah, ready.
I just want to say, I'm not sure if this will fall under this, but I just want to share what I did today with my kids because it kind of reminded me. I've been trying to just a little bit, trying to be a little out of my box. So I do number talks every day except for on Fridays, because that's Fun Friday. But we did a number talk, and I like to do what doesn't belong. And it's not always necessarily related to math, but like today I had a blue mug, I had a bagel, I had a donut, and I had a hamburger bun top. And I asked them which one doesn't belong. And, it took them a minute because a lot of them kept saying the cup, the cup, the cup, because it's not food. And I was like, okay, let's take a second. Let's think. Those are not wrong answers, but I just wanted them to say more. I wanted them to think out of the box. So I had to think for a second. And I had one of my kids, one of my EL babies, he actually raised his hand and he said, I think the bagel. And I was like, why do you think the bagel? And he was like, because the bagel is square and everything else is circles. So I think we don't need the bagel. And then I had another student raise their hand and say, well, I think the hamburger bun. And I was like, why? And they're like, because the hamburger bun doesn't have a hole. The cup has a hole, the donut has a hole, and the bagel has a hole, but the bun doesn't have a hole. And I was like, yes, I love that. I had another kid raise their hand and say, well, I think the donut. And I'm like, why the donut? And he's like, because the donut's the only thing with extra toppings on it. Everything else is just one color and it's simple. So, I did something so simple, not even related to math, but just to get their brains going, and it made them really just come out of the box. So I just wanted to share that because that's just something I've been working on, trying to just get them to think past what it is we're doing currently. So
The funny thing, I do number talks. And I actually do it to get them comfortable. And one reason why I do it is because I tell them it's no wrong answer. As long as you can explain your thinking, you're okay. So just to get them comfortable with the lesson. So I did it today. The numbers were 9, 16, 25, and 43. And we're talking about square roots of numbers. And of course, 9, 16, and 25 are perfect squares. And so, but with the one I do, they have to explain why each one doesn't belong. And so the one thing about high school students is in math, they always think it has to be up here. They don't think it can be low. So like, I'm like, why doesn't 9 belong? I don't. And then somebody was like, well, maybe it's a single digit. I was like, yeah, I mean, it's the only one that's by itself.
I love it.
And they're like, oh, okay. So then once we said 16, they was like, well, it's an even number. Okay, so 25 really stuck with them. They was like, I don't know, because we can't say it's odd because it's other odd numbers. We can't say this. So I told them, I said, well, what comes to my mind is it's the only one that can be represented by money. You can have a quarter that represents 25 cents. And then 43, of course, they got that and said it wasn't a perfect square because that's what we have been talking about. But I use that in my class because it gets them thinking, and I want them to think about, just tell me what you're thinking. What's the first thing comes to your mind? Because it works, and have that out of the box. Don't just sit. And sometimes with me, they think, oh, it can't be that easy. And I'm like, sometimes it is just that easy. So, but I do like that you're doing that in elementary school because like I said, I do it in high school as well. So I really enjoy it and get their minds thinking and rattling a little bit.
I love that. I'm a number talk person, and I intentionally, I don't want to say make it hard, but I make them think, which sometimes they like, sometimes they don't. In your example, which I'm gonna do that the second semester with those numbers, the sum of the digits are 7, but not 9. So the 16, the 43, and the 25. And the reason why I thought of that is because my gifted students, I pulled to a group because I always worked with the low, and the gifted teacher didn't come that day. I said, I'm gonna work with the gifted students. I'm in gifted endorsement. So I had them guessing numbers. And so the number, which was the task, but I extended it. So I said, all right, let's guess this number. The number's between 400 and 500. What will it start with? And I did, the children they get everything right, the task that I'm teaching. But when I got ready, that whole transfer, it was like they didn't know what it could possibly be. So it was like 600, 500. Finally, somebody, the think time you all talked about, they were thinking, and then it was like, oh, I said, so what must be in the hundreds place? Oh, well, it must be a 4. And then I went to math vocabulary. And that's something I personally am passionate about. We got to use the correct language in math, particularly. So I said the sum of the hundreds place and the tens place equals 6. And boy, that right there is where they're thinking, because using the language sum, understanding that that's what that means. So we figured out the number and we did another one. And then the challenge was for them to come up with their own.
Yeah,
like that.
y'all saying everything that you guys just said, it is the principle of the thinking centered classroom. In one of the figure 2.3, it was stating that creating questions in the classroom that create that type of back and forth where it can be a transfer of information. You guys are already doing it. And which is the beautiful part. We're thinking it's complex because this is a whole new idea, conceptual based learning. This is just totally new. We're like, how do we do it? But I don't think we realize some of the things we're already doing it. We're creating it's concept based instruction that is about growth. When you have those conversations and those questions, aren't you creating that type of growth? And then you're also making it explicit too when you start bringing in that language. So I think we're already doing it. I think it's all in our head that we're like, oh my God, this is just so much. But it's just because it's new. And I think once it's not new anymore, I think our mindset will definitely change.
Yeah, it's the change we got to accept.
Mhm.
That's what it is. I know that's a problem with me. I always, even when I have meetings and with my instructional coaches, I always get a little attitude because they always want me to do something else and do something else. And it's like, oh, can I give my kids a chance to see if they can get what I'm doing now? So it's like, I think we just got to get used to that, adapting to that change faster. Because if we can get used to that change adaptation, then we can expect our kids to do that too. Because at the end of the day, what I realize is my kids are a reflection of me. How I act and my personality, they're just like me. They're hyper, they're little scatterbrains like me. And now they're catching on to my rigor. They're fast learners. So, I think once we adapt, we can get them to get on that track too.
Yeah, I agree. As I was reading, I was like, oh, I do that. Oh, I'm already doing that. So yeah, you're right. It seems like it's complicated. I'm like, who's gonna have time to do all this? Who's gonna be able to wait for them to answer this? But yeah, most of the stuff, it's a good thing to remember, like, okay, we're already doing most of this stuff. And just like Ms. Cadence said, like, good teaching is good teaching. So most of this, we're already doing it. It's just a matter of just like, okay, explicitly putting that name and that label to it now, and knowing, how it affects the kid.
Well, we did that.
Yes, ladies, we did that. So I'm going to stop the recording.